speaker, Mr. Jerry Wilson, local golden boy I call him. Jerry is the CEO of Soloflex Corporation. Let me tell you a little bit about the company. The phenomenal success of Soloflex seemed remote in 1976 when Jerry Wilson applied for a patent for his muscle machine. From a meager beginning, Soloflex has become a model of business success, admired and copied in this industry for its product and marketing techniques. Jerry Wilson's idea was to create an exercise machine that would be attractive and convenient and easy to use in the privacy of one's home. It was an idea whose time had come. Although financial institutions were skeptical of the idea, the Wilsons rightly believed in it. Jerry put his primary livelihood of piloting chartered aircraft and began to concentrate full-time on the development of Soloflex. Sales for the first year of operation totaled $80,000 with a sale of 228 machines. The second year, sales increased to $1.2 million, and in 1984, sales reached $17 million. It was at that time that Jerry and his wife Marilyn recognized the advantages of using 30-minute sales videos in the rapidly growing cable television market. This spurred an increase in sales, surpassing 250,000 machines sold by mid-1988. Mr. Innovation, Mr. Entrepreneur himself, in my mind, Jerry Wilson.
Overthrow the government because it might create some stress. I wouldn't mind a little stress in that vein myself. Building an enterprising community, that's the topic that we're supposed to talk about today. Usually you think of a community as a town or a village or a city. But a community is also a country, if you want to look at it from that perspective. And of course you can take a global perspective and think that we're all in the same community, which we obviously are. The community that I'd like to talk about today and put a little bit of entrepreneurship into and see if I can't get them motivated to do something, of course, is my favorite company in the world, America Incorporated. It's a phenomenal company. When I inherited my stock share from my parents, it was worth a lot of money. People don't have a tendency to look at America as a corporation. Of course, America is a lot of different things. It is a corporation. I can't get lawyers to agree with me on that point, but I can get almost everybody else to agree with me on that point, because if you lay out what all corporations have as their bylaws, as their duties, America has that also. I've never seen in the real world a joint stock corporation, that is where all the members only had one share and couldn't have more than one. But America is that kind of a corporation. The whole foundation of the corporation was that the individual would be king here, that we would all be the sovereigns, that our labor and our credit and our materials would all be utilized appropriately, as according to common standard accounting practices and good capitalist practices. Obviously we haven't been doing that for some time now, and I think if there's anything that America needs, it's a halftime talk to get back to the basics, to get back to the principles. I don't think innovation is what's required right now. I think understanding the nature of capitalism, the nature of our economy, is what's necessary. Karl Marx said, and it's true of all democracies, especially an ultra democracy like communism would be, is that every cook must become a statesman. Well, when the owners of the corporation, when they are the bottom line responsible party, it can't be any other way. America will be run no better than the average stockholder understands and demands that it be run. Your share, your individual stock share of America Inc. is worth about $250,000. A lot of people find this surprising. They never thought that they owned anything worth $250,000 that they weren't aware of. But you do have it. In Canada, the average value of the stock share of a holder of Canada Inc. stock would be $200,000. That's the total value divided by the stockholders, the number of stockholders, into all of the things that they own jointly and collectively. You can buy a citizenship or a stock share in the Mauritius Islands for $50,000. They haven't been around very long, and they've, only accumulated this much capital. You can leave the United States and you can go buy your way into any other corporation you want to. America won't allow you to have two separate stock ownerships. If you leave the United States, you have to leave it. If you buy stock in Canada and become a Canadian citizen or a Canadian stockholder, then you can't hold your American stock anymore. The average wealth of a private individual in the United States, if you took all the individuals and you divided that into the total amount of privately held wealth, you would come up with an average private wealth equity of about $30,000 per person, compared to $250,000 of wealth that you hold collectively with the other stockholders. That is, 89% of all the wealth in the United States is not held privately at all, it's held collectively. If you added up all and it's hard to do, and I've tried to get my accountants and some outside people to try to help me, list the assets of America so I can divide the 240 million people to see what it's really worth. It's a little difficult. It's difficult in any company to get a fair appraisal of the real capital assets of it. Particularly true, when something is as broad as this. But every country seems to have determined about what that is, and they put them up for sale to anybody who can meet the price. Lots of people are moving to Canada, and they're paying the $200,000 to buy their way into the corporation. I'm just trying to prove to you that America is a corporate entity. And now it's other things also, but it is equally true that it is a corporation. It has a corporate resolution to borrow, like all of your corporations do. You can pledge your equity, you can risk your equity, and you can take some paper money from the banks, the public, your credit. Individually, you can take the public's credit, and if you can build something with your labor paid by this credit that's worth the face value printed on it, then you create new wealth where it didn't exist before. You take labor and you build capital with it. That's really the foundation of our system. It isn't based anymore on how much gold we have or how much silver we have. It's based on what our labor builds. If we build something that's worth the face value printed on the credit we go and get from the bank, which the bank simply invents with a stroke of the pen, then those dollars are made good by what they build. And those dollars will remain good as long as that asset remains and serves. It isn't taught in school, and I've always wondered why our capitalist system isn't really explained in its fundamental simplicities, because if it were, we wouldn't be in the quagmire that we're in now with inflation, with postponed inflation that is a deficit, with an improper allocation of our labor and our credit. Credit, your credit, every time a paper dollar is printed or every time a banker makes a notation and creates a new deposit, your name is on that paper dollar. It's your credit that's being extended. 46% of all the new credit every year that is issued is allocated, and this is on an ongoing basis every year after year after year. 46% of all of your credit is going to pay labor to build something that we all own equally, that we all employ equally, that we all benefit from equally. And as we build these capital assets, these material handling systems, that are the foundation of our factory, that have made us rich, those dollars are backed up as good as any dollars that would be diverted into the private sector to pay labor to build something owned by an individual. 54% of all of our credit every year is diverted over to build the things, to pay labor to build the things that will be owned by individuals. That's the way it is. I don't know who came up with that division, why it exists that way, but it does. I really have no problems with it either. Most Americans cannot tell you the difference between an expense account and a capital account. Most politicians cannot tell you the difference between an expense account and a capital account. But I guarantee you one thing, if your credit is allocated into an expense account as opposed to being allocated into a capital account, your credit will be lost forever. If you build something that you can't sell or that you can't employ to increase your productivity with your credit, you can just write it off. The day it's allocated, it's lost, and it'll never be seen again. Which means that your other credit had better go into something that is going to stay around and that will be worth more than it cost you to get it made, to make up for these losses that naturally occur on the other side. There used to be a law in this country. Now, I've had my law firm research it. And they tell me that before World War II, it was against the law to use my credit in an expense item. That is, credit was forbidden by law, like it is in the private sector, to go into expense accounts. It has to go into capital accounts. Except in the case of a war. You know, it doesn't matter if you have a bad credit rating if you lose the war. So we have this exception to the rule that we can take our paper money and that we can build things that we can't sell and that we can't employ to increase our productivity in a short-term situation to get over an emergency. Companies have the flexibility to do that too. Of course, you know, you always pledge your equity and you'll lose that portion of the equity if you can't make good on the deal. Or you'll have to work harder to make it up later. In World War II, of course, we went off of the regular rule, which demanded that all credit go into capital accounts so that all credit would be backed up in real value. And we allocated $2 trillion of paper money into the expense account. And we prevailed in the war. And we had $2 trillion worth of useless expense items sitting around collecting dust after it was over with. Well, my parents' generation took some hair from the dog that bit them, more capital, more paper money, and this time they went in and they built the largest capital project in the history of the world. They built the interstate highway systems, 40,500 miles of material handling systems. Those of you who have gone to college and studied how to run a factory, or who may have picked up a textbook like I did, you know, and read it, or a material handlings book, or any of these things that tell you how to run a factory, the statement that's made all through it, and it's the most fundamental aspect of running a factory, 80% of your productivity increases, that is, the things that will deliver better value to your customers, are going to come from the material handling systems you install in that factory, whether they're aisleways, whether they're trolleys, whether they're forklifts, whether they're pallet operations. 80% of your productivity increases are going to come from those material handling systems. If you take the same understanding of your own factory and you look at it at our jointly owned factory out here and look at the material handling systems we have out here, you can understand why America was able to deliver more value in its products than anybody else in the world for years and years and years. Okay? We have viaducts, we have bridges, we have canals, we have airports, we have slow freight rail systems which carry heavy freight, but mostly we have an interstate highway system. You know, it's very difficult to say how much this has benefited us in hard dollar terms, but I would suppose that the interstate highway systems brought the cost of goods down so low, which in other words brought the value up so high, that the interstate highway systems have probably added about $5 trillion in real wealth to the United States, and they cost $500 billion to build. Okay. I am real proud that my parents' generation built the largest capital project in the history of the world. Before them, their parents had built the largest capital projects in the history of the world when they harnessed our rivers. And today I get essentially free electricity compared to Japan Inc., Mexico Inc., any of these other inks out there. My energy is just practically free because my parents or my grandparents had the courage to all risk their credit and go build those dams and those hydro projects. Okay? And now I look at my generation and think, what have we built? Yeah? I mean, isn't it our birthright? I mean, isn't it a responsibility for us to all work jointly, for all of us to pledge our credit to go build capital with? And As part of that obligation, if we want to show the proper appreciation to our parents and grandparents who made us wealthy, who left us this great wealth, is that we have to do it better than they did it. Again, my parents built better than their parents, built bigger and better and faster. We need, in the United States of America, for our generation, to build the largest capital projects in the history of the world. Just like our parents did. Otherwise, we've kind of denied our birthright. We've said, well, thanks a lot for handing us this inheritance, which, you know, came from your sweat and your willingness to risk on your own labor. But we don't think it's important, and we have enough that we could really sell off our assets for the rest of our life and live in a standard of living which most rich people would find enjoyable. You know, our generation is not building anything that you could remotely put into the capital accounts. We build things that take away from our wealth. We print paper dollars and we put them into expense accounts as though we were in a war. We have built as much military hardware since the end of World War II as we have built capital assets. And all of that's costed into the products that you try to take overseas and sell. It's costed into the products every time you go to the store. A good 30 to 40% of the price of everything you pay for in the United States is to pay for our military welfare state. It comes down to a pretty basic question. You know, are we a nation of military welfareists? You know, living on the equity provided to us by our parents and our grandparents and all the generations before that? Or are we a nation of free, enterprising, entrepreneurial capitalists who will take our labor, our credit, and our raw materials and will create a tremendous new wealth for it and provide opportunities for everybody out there to make a good wage? If I were king, and I'm not, well, I am, and so are you. We can do anything we want to. You know, we call all the shots. We own the company. We hire the board of directors that will allocate our credit, material, and labor resource. So we have the capacity to build anything that our little hearts desire. You know, frankly, I don't think there's anybody in this room or in the United States that wants to become poorer. Yet we all are becoming poorer on an ongoing basis. We are eroding and living off of the equity provided by our parents, and we're not adding anything back to it at all. Some people think, well, it takes a lot of gold to build highways or bridges or new maglev rail systems or some new material handling system or even to repair the old ones, and that isn't true at all. You know, all it takes is paper dollars, labor, raw materials, and a little management to decide what needs to be built and why, and then supervises it to make sure that it gets done, and it gets done on time, on cost, on schedule. And then we start enjoying the benefits of this, knowing that those dollars have been backed up. Inflation, the only thing inflation is the difference between the face value printed on this credit that we issue and the real value of what labor builds with that credit. Now, if we can sell it outright, even though it may be a weapon or something, if we can sell it outright and get hard currency back in for it, it's a capital item. But you have to sell it. Remember, a capital item is defined by, you can either sell it outright, now you can't sell it to your own stockholders because that doesn't count, you have to sell it outside. Or you have to employ it to increase your productivity so that you can produce more and better and prosper like that. Until America comes to an understanding of the difference between an expense account and a capital account, we will never stop the inflation. There are a lot of wild theories about things that cause inflation. Nobody really knows what inflation is. Inflation is simply the difference between the face value printed on the credit that paid labor to build the thing and the real value, a fair capitalist appraised value of how much return you're going to get off of this thing that was built. If it in fact is worth the face value printed on the credit to do it with, then there's no inflation. There's only new wealth created by labor. Just like Mr. Lincoln said a long time ago, that all capital is created by labor. Gold doesn't create capital. Wishing it so doesn't create it. Labor creates it. But labor cannot manage. I've had long talks with the heads of two of the biggest labor unions in the United States, and both of them have told me point blank, look, we're labor. Don't ask us to manage. Don't ask us what needs to be built. Just put us to it. And pay us well. That's all we want. So who is the manager of America who's going to decide what we build next? And I'm having to tell you, it's you. Yeah. And you tell your congressman, this is what you're supposed to vote on. This is what needs to get done. Let's build some capital in the United States and let's have some economic prosperity. A little historical perspective on what creates private economic prosperity. There's never been a period of sustained economic prosperity in Western civilization until after those countries have made the public investment. One is absolutely necessary before the other one can take place. When I talk about public property or public investments, most people have a tendency to think, oh, well, that stuff belongs to the government, you know, that it's all public property, which means it doesn't belong to anybody. It's not true. 5% of the people in the world own our assets, us. Nobody else owns them. That stuff isn't public property, that's private property. Those highways out there don't belong to anybody in the world except you. And those airports don't belong to anybody except you. And none of these material handling systems or raw materials or forest or mines or any of this stuff belong to anybody except you. The publicly educated workforce, which is the largest, most overeducated and underutilized workforce in the history of the world, is a horrible mess because that labor is not being directed into productive activities. It could also be, and businessmen are supposed to look at horrible messes as big opportunities. It is equally the largest opportunity that we've ever had in the history of the world. Because with all of this workforce, as educated and as industrious as they are, if they were properly directed into building real capital in the United States, would create a wealth that would double our net equity. Your $250,000 equity in America Inc., which is essentially our standard of living, could be doubled in 8 years to $500,000 if we would direct our workforce into building the right projects. What are the right projects? Well, first of all, material handling systems, because that's where you're going to make the biggest increase in your productivity. The Corps of Engineers, for about 15 years, has been sitting on $1.5 trillion worth of basic infrastructure improvements. We have 520,000 bridges in the United States. According to the Corps of Engineers, 20% of those, or over 100,000 of those bridges, are officially classified as dangerous. 45% of them are in need of repair. We've got so much work to do out there. I'm telling you, they're sitting on $1.5 trillion worth of contracts ready to bid right now. And they've been ready to bid them out forever. Yet Congress has not said, bid those contracts, and here, print up some money to do it with, and get that labor force back to work, building up our asset base. Building things that back up paper dollars 10 times better than anything you'll build for private consumption. We can create all the wealth that we have the will to build on. You know, are we industrious enough? Do we have a sense of our birthright, of what we should be doing? Or are we going to continue to live like, I would say like cowards? Yeah. Building weapons against some heinous devil that never existed and probably never would. You know? There's lots of things to build out there. I could figure out probably 200 or 300 years of wealth-creating projects to put labor to. Yeah. Anything that makes the land more beautiful is worthy of our labor and our credit, because the value sticks with it after it's made more beautiful. Anything that increases the productivity for commerce or industry, or the infrastructure, or the sewers, or the canals, any of these sorts of things are legitimate things to put our labor and our credit into. You know, why is our credit going off into nowhere? Why are we building inflation into it by how we allocate our labor and our credit? Labor and credit are really the same thing. They're one and the same thing. The paper money is an invention, a contrived invention, because labor won't show up with it unless they get paid something. And everybody accepts paper dollars, whether it's a war or whether it isn't. There's some real basic misunderstandings in the United States. People have drawn the wrong conclusion from some of the lessons that we've had. I've had people who should know better say that what we need is a good war to get the economy going again, because it turns on the paper money machine. Well, see, we can turn on the paper money machine without contriving a war and murdering anybody. We can turn on the paper money machine and pour it into hard assets, and every one of those paper dollars would be backed up. So we have everything it takes to get wealthy, more wealthy, to provide real opportunities for people in every county of the United States of America. And if we had the will to do it, or would do it, we could start it in about 2 weeks. There is good, honest, capital building labor needed in every single county of the United States of America where the people are. Improving our infrastructure, backing up paper dollars and making them real. Now the world watches what we do with our paper dollars, whether we watch it or not. We print about twice as many paper dollars as we back up in any hard assets in the United States. Consequently, the world money markets will ever so often take a look at us and they'll readjust things. So now it costs us $2 or 2 hours of our labor to trade, where before it only took 1 hour of our labor to trade. We're not near as bad as Mexico, though. Mexico, since 1977, when I moved to El Paso, the peso and the dollar were exchanging at 22 to 1. Today they're exchanging at 2,200 to 1. The Mexicans print up about 10,000 times more paper pesos than they back up in any real hard assets. You see? Well, how can a guy do business like that? And why would anybody want to do business like that? You see? In Japan, of course, their constitution that we persuaded them to take, outlaws them to have a night watchman's department. So they don't allocate any, and essentially any of their labor and their credit, their new paper yen, into that expense account. And whether we've kept the elephants away from them or not is, history will probably show that there was never any real threat to them in the first place. But they don't have to carry that cost of operation when they show up at the world market. Now, we've got cheaper raw materials than the Japanese. We have better material handling systems than the Japanese. We have more productive labor, because labor is productive in proportion as capital is supplied to that labor to make it productive. One group of people is no more inherently productive than any other group of people. Doesn't matter what their customs are, what their cultures are. It may happen that if they are industrious by nature, they'll figure out a way to make all this stuff work. But essentially, labor is productive in proportion as capital is supplied to it. That's the only thing that makes any difference. Okay? We have the most productive labor in the United States of any country, including Japan, right now, even today. We have much better material handling systems. Doesn't cost us near as much to get stuff moved around, and that's the number one cost in doing business, transportation. We ought to be able to kick their butts in the world marketplace. But we have one item that we have to cost into our products that they're not having to cost in, and it's on that one item alone that we lose our market share. We're paying about 25 to 30% of the cost of our product in our night watchman's department. We've gold-plated the security windows on our business. We've taken up to 30 and 40% of the finest, most industrious and productive employees of the company and put them into something that adds nothing to the financial resources of the company, in fact, draws directly away from it. Well, if we want to compete in a world market, then we've got to get our expenses in line. And we're going to have to stand and take a real hard look at how much national defense we need and what is national defense. What really constitutes national defense? Well, number one, we know from Ho Chi Minh's lesson he just taught us, from the lesson we had previously taught to King George, that our national defense is primarily the fact that we're all armed and that there's 150 million assassins in the United States, and it would be impossible to occupy this country. Didn't Ho Chi Minh just show us that? And shouldn't we have already known the lesson? I mean, didn't we teach that to King George 200 years ago? And isn't that the number 2 amendment or commandment in our Church of State? Number 1, you can stand up and say anything you want to, print anything you want to. Number 2, anybody tries to stop you, you can shoot them. Okay? That is our national defense, and it gives us absolute immunity to being occupied by a foreign country, or to being even occupied by our own armies. Okay? That's about all the defense that I see that we would need. As for all these occupation armies that we have on other people's territory, we must be the first nation in the history of the world who didn't make the occupied place pay for its own occupation. Julius Caesar would roll over in his grave if he could see what we're doing. Why in the world would you go in and shoot a bunch of people, put your armed forces carrying their guns around, with their uniforms, intimidating the hell out of everybody, and then not exact any tribute from them? Why not suck them dry like everybody else has done for all these years? I mean, if we're going to do that, then let's do it. If we're not going to do that, then let's quit bearing the burden of the expense and get the hell off their territory. Either that or force them into statehood. And then develop them. Now here's... I would love to see 100 states in America. I would love for all of the Americas to be states in our closed shop trading union. We make them pay the dues, but we don't give them any of the benefits of membership. We have 50 members, and it's all for us and none for them. We are a closed shop trade union, and we get a short-term selfish financial interest off of that, but we lose in the long term, as all closed shop unions do. People go around them, they figure ways to get around it. I don't know if Zachary Taylor was really any relative of mine or not. My mother always said he was, but he was the guy that captured half of Mexico and brought it into the Union. There was a big debate at the time as to whether he should have gone ahead and taken the whole thing, and wouldn't everybody have been much better off had he done that at the time? And the answer, of course, is obviously yes. It's not too late. I don't think... Look, my wife and I got a peace award one time, so I mean, I don't advocate that we murder anybody in this thing. I think that what we need is to talk over a friendly corporate merger and pull in some new members. And maybe file a few antitrust suits against some of the existing states to bust them up into smaller pieces so that they don't monopolize the political agenda way to the point that they're doing it. What we need is some fundamental reforms in our banking systems, which allows us to take your credit. You're allowing your credit to be thrown out the window on an ongoing basis every single day. Well, why? If you own stock in a publicly held corporation and you had $250,000 of equity in that corporation, wouldn't you expect to get an annual report? Ever seen one? Wouldn't you expect to get a dividend? 5% dividend on your stock in America Inc. should be giving you about $1,000 a month. Ever seen it? Why? And why are we paying taxes to run a system? You don't need taxes to run a company. Why should I have to pay to work in my own company? You know? You don't need taxes to run the system. Now, let me show you how silly it is. We will generate some new credit. We'll pass an act in Congress authorizing new credit to be extended. It will go through the Corps of Engineers, who are paid by taxes. And then it will be paid out to private contractors, you know, who are just private citizens, private companies. Why is this guy over here getting paid from these guys over here when he should be paid out of the proceeds of the same loan that these guys were paid out of? His job is absolutely as instrumental as the concrete contractor or the paving contractor or the engineer or any of these other people. Why do we have this contrivance to take money from Mr. A to give it to Mr. B? It isn't necessary. It's just it's a waste of time. And nobody, from Ralph Waldo Emerson on down, has ever agreed that anybody can be happy with taxes. It's a joke. It always has been. We don't need to run our company this way. We can run our company where we're paid out of the proceeds of the loans for the wealth that we are creating. And if we're fair with ourselves at the end of these projects, we'll give them a fair appraisal. Did it take too long to build it? Okay, there's some inflation. There's your penalty into it. Did you cheat on it? Okay, well, there's some more inflation into it. And you guys just screwed us all. You know, if we would exercise proper management in bidding these contracts out and deciding what needs to be built, if we could get our Congress, which is really our board of directors back there, to at least answer the question of what are we going to do with our labor and our credit in this country, you know, then we would have a chance to have some real economic prosperity and a general boom time to take us into the 21st century. And again, we would have fulfilled our birthright and honored our parents and our grandparents by having built better and more capital than they did, and teaching the next generation, you know, what it's really all about. We have to leave the place better than we found it. We'll just pass through. I think you have to earn the soul. I don't think they give them away. And you do it through work. You know, and work is love. Questions?